advisor Suye, my co-advisor Dr. Amelia, and my committee members, Dr. Padma and Dr. Goretti. Thank you all for being here. And today I'm going to present my degree exam about my thesis titled Engineering May Support Silicon Nanoparticles for the Delivery of Quercetin and Resveratrol, Structural Characterization and Assessment of Antioxidant and Anti-Inflammatory Potential. So, these are the contents I'm going to talk about, but I'm not spending too much time on this. And to start, I'm going to give you a little bit of context. Non-communicable diseases are chronic diseases, and they are of slow progression and prolonged duration. They are not transmitted one to another person, and they are characterized by the interplay of complex factors like physiological, genetic, environmental, and behavioral factors. This is a global burden because they represent about 70% of the total worldwide deaths, and they keep growing. Among them, we can find cancers, cardiovascular diseases, neurodegenerative disorders, metabolic disorders, and chronic respiratory diseases. As you can see, they are very diverse, but they share something in common. That is the mechanistic interconnection between them. And what is this? This is oxidative stress and chronic inflammation. Oxidative stress and chronic inflammation are correlated, as oxidative stress exacerbates inflammation and inflammation exacerbates oxidative stress. This causes damages in lipids, proteins, DNA that at the end causes mutations and metabolism disruptions and leads to this this diverse type of diseases. So, current therapies have a lot of limitations. As for the antioxidants, we can find natural or synthetic antioxidants like vitamin C, E, polyphenols, carotenoids, flavonoids, but they have poor solubility, they have they have low absorption and fast metabolism. They are not specific, so they cannot target specific organelles. And also, the excessive scavenging of ROS can lead to a disruption in natural balance of the body. So we cannot just quench all ROS in the body. And for the anti-inflammatory drugs, we can find non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, glucocorticoids, disease-modifying antiromantic drugs, and biological agents. But the prolonged use of these type of drugs has severe side effects as they are highly toxic. The biological agents are costly, and most of them only target a single component of this complex interplay of oxidative stress and inflammation. That's why we need a new approach that has pleiotropic properties in which we can target factors in oxidative stress but also in inflammation. And the solution for this could be polyphenols. Polyphenols are secondary metabolites from plants, and in nature we can find around or more than 8,000 types of polyphenols. They are characterized for having aromatic rings, at least one aromatic ring, and hydroxyl groups. And we can find 4 families that are phenolic acids, lignans, stilbenes, in which I'm going to focus on resveratrol, and flavonoids, and I'm going to focus on quercetin. And these are of great interest because they exert several anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-cancer, and neuroprotective effects, as they can modulate important pathways that are related in the activation of oxidative stress and in the activation of inflammation. They can also regulate cell survival and metabolic pathways. Enzymes they can also modulate, and the consumption of this has been linked to the reduced incidence of diseases like cardiovascular diseases, some cancers, metabolic disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases. in wine and in a lot of fruits. It is yellowish, and the key structural features we can find in quercetin is it has 5 hydroxyl groups over there. We have the aromatic rings, and we have a pyrrole group. Its therapeutic profile consists in anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-cancer, neuroprotective, and cardiovascular properties. As it can target several key pathways related in oxidation and in inflammation. Resveratrol is a stilbene, and it can be found in grapeseed, in wine, in cocoa, in peanuts, in berries, and its key structural features are its 3 hydroxyl groups and the ethylene bridge over there. Likewise, it has antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, and neuroprotective properties, and it can target complementary and similar pathways as quercetin. Why I'm focusing on these 2 polyphenols? Well, as I mentioned, the key structural features confer them direct anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties, and that's why they have been widely investigated. Also, it has been reported the synergy between quercetin and resveratrol, as their co-administration can target complementary and the same complex signaling targets. They have been reported that together they can enhance cell growth inhibition, DNA damage, apoptosis induction, and cell cycle arrest in some cancer cell models. And they theorize that this happened because they can target shared pathways, and they can have like this connection in the targeting. And also they have been reported to increase antioxidant efficacy to modulate metabolic pathways and to exert antitumor effects. However, these combined effects are context and concentration dependent. That's why the proper formulation of both of them is important. We theorize that the recurrent encapsulation can exert these properties in an exacerbated way. That's why we are investigating them together. And you may ask why they are so wonderful and why they are magical and have a lot of properties. Why are we not using them like regularly? Well, they have a lot of limitations as low aqueous solubility. They have poor oral bioavailability, and once you consume it, only 1 or 2% of all of them are absorbed into the body. That is connected with the rapid metabolism of both. They have a rapid clearance from the circulation, and the effects cannot be seen in the body, and they don't accumulate. They have a short half-life from minutes to 1 hour and a half as a maximum, and they are unstable. They suffer from rapid degradation when exposed to light, to high temperatures, and to pH changes. And as well, they suffer from enzymatic degradation. To counteract these limitations, drug delivery systems have been developed, and drug delivery systems are known to be platforms or systems that transport and protect and deliver drugs or bioactive compounds of great interest. And we can find conventional drug delivery systems that are oral, like tablets or capsules or syrups, topical, like creams or ointments, or simple injections. And the advantages is that they can improve drug solubility, they enhance the bioavailability of the drug, they could enable targeted delivery and reduce the side effects by controlled release profiles. However, they also have several limitations, as they have rapid degradation and poor pharmacokinetics, have non-specific distribution, and this leads to inefficient therapeutic outcomes. That's why nanoparticles come to the act as novel drug delivery systems. And you may ask, what is a nanoparticle? Well, a nanoparticle is a tiny particle in the range from 1 nanometer to 100 nanometers, or in the case of clinical use, it can extend up to 1,000 nanometers, as nanoparticles can exert their efficacy or their physical and chemical properties up to that scale. And we have several classifications of nanoparticles. Here I'm going to give you the types of nanoparticles based on the components. They could be organic, inorganic, or carbon-based. I'm going to focus on inorganic nanoparticles, specifically in silica nanoparticles. And nanoparticles are of great interest because they can be carriers or nanocarriers, vehicles for a lot of type of drugs. And, well, as I mentioned, they are tiny in size, and this is beneficial because they can cross biological barriers. And they can get through the immunologic system and evade this immune system. They have a high surface area that can interact with the drug, and they have surface modifiability, and we can control the release, or we can target the release to make it specific. As I mentioned, we can have a control release that is triggered by pH or by temperature or by the presence of glutathione or enzymes. Some of them are highly biocompatible. In the case of silica, it is highly biocompatible. And some nanoparticles also exert optical and magnetic properties that can help us to track or to image the delivery of the drug into the system. And for the case of mesoporous silica nanoparticles, they are composed of silicate dioxide, and they are characterized for having pores within the range of 2 to 15 nanometers, and they have modifiable size, pore volume, and pore diameter. And this is important because depending on that specific textural properties, you can drop more or less drops, and you can have a controlled release or a targeted release. Their surface can be easily modifiable, and you can add little molecules, and you can add peptides, antibodies, polymers into them to make a targeted delivery to specific cells or to make the controlled release. And they are highly stable and biocompatible. We chose them because they can load hydrophobic compounds, and the high surface area allows for the co-encapsulation or the co-delivery of our two polyphenols, and they can protect these molecules from degradation. With this approach, we expect to have a broader mechanistic coverage. As I mentioned, resveratrol and quercetin have shared and different targets, so we expect we can target a more complex regulation of inflammation and oxidation. We also expect to reduce the dose as we are delivering both of them. We expect to deliver a high concentration of both of them, but also as both of them are inside, we don't need a lot of concentration, so that would decrease the toxicity or side effects. With this approach, we also hope for a synchronized pharmacokinetics as both are inside, both could be delivered in the same ratio and in the same way and time. And we expect to improve the stability and bioavailability of these phytochemicals. And now for the justification of the project. As I mentioned, non-communicable diseases are still a global health burden, and they are the major cause of disease and of death worldwide. And they are characterized for the interconnection of chronic inflammation oxidative stress. And current therapies lack of pleiotropic approaches, and single targeted therapies are inefficient for this complex interplay, and that's why polyphenols come to the act, as they can target several pathways of this interconnection. Specifically, quercetin and resveratrol can exert these pleiotropic properties, and we can overcome the limitations of the poor pharmacokinetics of quercetin and resveratrol by co-encapsulating them into mesoporosilica nanoparticles that serve as nanocarriers for their delivery. Our hypothesis is that the co-encapsulation of resveratrol and quercetin into mesoporosilica nanoparticles will enhance the stability and biological properties, specifically the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory capacities. The objectives are to encapsulate resveratrol and quercetin into mesoporosilica nanoparticles, structurally characterize them, and evaluate their potential for antioxidant and anti-inflammatory capacities. Sorry, there is a title. The specific objectives are to chemically synthesize the silica nanoparticles and characterize them by DLS, potential, SEM, FTIR, TGA, XRD, and MET, to co-encapsulate the quercetin and characterize the formulation by DLS, potential, FTIR, TGA, and XRD, to evaluate the antioxidant capacity by DPH, ABTS, and PRAC, and to evaluate the anti-inflammatory capacity. For the methodology, we chose the Stover method, as it is a well-reported method that yields monodispersed and spherical silica nanoparticles, and it consists in two reactions. The first one is the hydrolysis of Teos. Teos is a precursor of silica, and in the presence of water, it starts to hydrolyze and form silanol groups, and then with ammonium, we can start to condense the silanol groups into siloxane, that is the network of our silica nanoparticles. So we have an inflation and growth of the particles around these TIOs. The key reagents are TIOs, or tetraethyl orthosilicate, that is the silica precursor. We have ammonia, that is the catalyst of both reactions, and also it stabilizes the particles. We have water as the hydrolyzing agent, and we have ethanol that is the solvent and help us in the visibility and the control particle. The advantages of this type of synthesis is that it gives us uniform spherical nanoparticles, and we can control the size of our nanoparticles. It is simple, cheap, and reproducible, and we can also modify the surface easily of the nanoparticles yielded from this type of synthesis, and also the nanoparticles are highly biocompatible. For the co-encapsulation, we chose a slow evaporation method that was done in a rotavapor, and this was chosen because it generates a gradient in the concentration of the polyphenols, and this gradient drives the polyphenols into the mesopores. Then we did the characterization by scanning electron microscopy, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, dynamic light scattering and zeta potential, thermogravimetric analysis, Grignard Teller analysis, drug encapsulation efficiency by UV-Vis spectrophotometer, and X-ray diffraction. For the biological properties, we assess the antioxidant capacity by DPH, ABTS, and PRAC, and the anti-inflammatory capacity by turbidimetric assay, in which we use heat denaturation of proteins, and we measure the percentage of inhibition of this denaturation. And specifically for the antioxidant capacities, DPPH, well, the three of them are colorimetric assays, and the DPPH consists in a DPPH stable purple radical, that when gets in contact with the antioxidants can donate a hydrogen atom. So this works by hydrogen atom donation. And for the case of cuprate, the antioxidants reduce the complex of copper 2 to copper 1. And we can see a change of color from blue to yellow, and it works by electron donation, and ABTS can work by either hydrogen donation or electron donation, and ABTS radical gets scavenged by the antioxidants. Now for the results, we perform the scanning electron microscopy to visualize the structure and the morphology of our nanoparticles. And as you can see in the figure A, we can see they are highly monodispersed, they don't have aggregation, and they are spherical. In the second figure, we can see that they are highly spherical and they have a low aggregation, but what we can notice in here is that they have some surface depressions, probably because of the light you can see it, but they have surface depressions that can be related to the pore openings. So since the very beginning, we can assume that we have some type of pores, and we can also mention that we have a successful synthesis, as we have monodispersed, spherical, and non-aggregated nanoparticles. And then we use the Brunner-Taylor theory and nitrogen absorption isotherms to analyze if indeed we have pores. And in this isotherm, we have a type 4 isotherm that is characteristic of mesoporous structures, and the type of hysteristics we have in there is type 2, that is the type of inportal pores, and we have a non-ordered porous network with this type of hysteresis. And we also get these textural properties from the nanoparticles that are a surface area of 200 and a pore volume of 0.445 and a pore diameter of 5.41 nanometers. And with this, we can assume that we have mesoporosity, that we have enough surface area that can interact with our polyphenols to have a high drug loading and a controlled release, and the pore size is enough to encapsulate resveratrol and quercetin, as the size of resveratrol and quercetin is maximum from 1.5 nanometers, so they can get into the pores, and the pore is high enough to get them inside or also to release them. And this confirms that we have a partial mesostructuring under the conditions we use for the synthesis. For the hydrodynamic diameter, we use dynamic light scattering that gives us the particle size, the size distribution, and the colloidal behavior. For the silicon nanoparticles, we have a hydrodynamic diameter of 126 and a polydispersity index of 0.01. That means that we have a highly monodispersed, uniform and stable network of silica or of the nanoparticles. But in the case of the co-encapsulation of the polyphenols, we see an increase, a considerable increase in the hydrodynamic diameter, as we have a hydrodynamic diameter of 1,577 nanometers and a polydispersity index of 0.29. This significant increase means that the polyphenols are not only present within the pores, they are also absorbed into the surface, and since they are adsorbed into the surface, they interact within each other, and since they are in an aqueous medium, they tend to aggregate. And this means we also modify the surface, and these interparticle interactions are somehow making agglomeration. So the colloidal stability of our system might be in danger. But we have also a second peak that is within 140 and 420 nanometers, and we could have a dual behavior, and these particles are in a good range for the biological properties we are expecting. Now for the colloidal stability, we measure the zeta potential to know the surface charge of our system and to know the colloidal stability. The silica nanoparticles gave us a zeta potential of minus 32.17 millivolts, and this is in accordance with silica nanoparticles, as they are highly negative due to the protonated desirable groups in the surface of our silica nanoparticles, and this means they are highly stable and well dispersed. Zeta potential measurements in the range of 30 or more millivolts are highly stable particles. However, our system decreased the zeta potential to minus 4.21, and this makes the colloidal stability be in danger. As I mentioned, this is caused due to the adsorption of our phytochemicals into the surface, and they are like shielding the negative surface charges of the silica due to hydrogen bonding and pi-pi stack interactions between them. And this could also suggest that we require modification in the surface to make it more stable. And then for the structural characteristics, we measure them by X-ray diffraction, and with this we knew more about the crystalline or amorphous structure of our system. In the case of silica, we can see a broad band in there that is typical of silica nanoparticles, and that tells us that it is amorphous and that is desirable because it reduces the toxicity. And in the case of the co-encapsulation, we have some peaks that refer to the polyphenols that are adsorbed into the surface. As they couldn't get into the pores, they could not get amorphized. But as you can see, we maintain the broad peak with some structural modifications, and that also means that we indeed have polyphenols inside the pores, and that pores could be amorphized, so we have a partial amorphization. And this is important because this reduces the toxicity, but also improves the bioavailability and the solubility of our polyphenols when they are delivered. Then we use Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy to know more about the molecular structure and functional groups of our components, the bare silica, quercetin and resveratrol, and the formulation. And in the spectra of silica, we can see the typical peaks of siloxane and cyanosyl groups. Siloxane is here in the 1080 and 810 and 460, and the 960 is attributed to the cyanosyl groups in the surface. Then for quercetin, we have a characteristic peak of the OH that is present in the quercetin due to hydrogen bonding within the molecule, and also we have other characteristic peaks of polyphenols that are from the aromatic groups and double bonds. In resveratrol, we have a similar spectrum. We have the same broad peak and some peaks that are related to the aromatic compounds. And interestingly, in our formulation, we can see appearance of this broad band, and it's not as marked as in quercetin and resveratrol, but that is signal that we are having interactions between the silanol groups and the resveratrol and quercetin. And this is not that intense because I read that pi stack interactions between the polyphenols can interfere with the signal of hydrogen bonds, and they could reduce and make broader peak. And also we have these modified bands within this range. As you can see, they are shifted and they are also reduced or attenuated, and that means we are having strong interactions of our system of the polyphenols with the silica matrix. And also the 1080 band is preserved, and that means that our silica is intact. And the silanol band, or here, the 9060 band is shifted and attenuated. So we are having also interactions of the silanol groups in the surface with our polyphenols. We assume we have hydrogen bonding and pi stacking interactions. However, we do not 100% confirm these interactions, and we would require more assays to verify this. Here is like the summary of what I mentioned, and the conclusion here is that the spectral shifts and the peak attenuations tell us that we are having strong host-guest interactions, and that we successfully encapsulated quercetin and resveratrol into the mesopore silica nanoparticles. Now we use thermogravimetric analysis coupled with derivative thermogravimetric curve to evaluate the thermal behavior and the stability of our system. And first we have silica, and it only had a reduction of mass of 3%. And the first reduction happens before 100 degrees, and that's related with the absorbed water into the surface. Then we have a second loss of weight that can be attributed to the removal of surface silanol groups, and a third loss that could be of silanol groups as well, or residual organics, or chemically bound water. But the reduction was minimal, and we can assume we have a thermal stable matrix, and that is a characteristic of silica. And then we have quercetin that is not as stable as silica, and first we have a loss of mass before 150 degrees, and that is also attributed to water loss. And then we have a second weight loss that is attributable to the loss of quercetin structure, and that happens around 300 degrees or 360 degrees. And for resveratrol, we have a similar effect. First, we have the loss of water before 150 degrees, and then we have the decomposition of the resveratrol structure between the 300 degrees and 360 degrees. And this is very common in flavonoid structures and steel beam structures. And we can conclude that these phytochemicals are thermally unstable, as they lose 50 or more % of their mass. But in the case of our system, we can see that we as well have a loss of the of water, but then we have like a smaller reduction in the weight loss, and that means with the silica nanoparticles, we are thermally protecting our phytochemicals, and instead of losing 50 or more % of the mass of our phytochemicals, we are losing 45%, so we can assume that we are improving thermal stability of our phytochemicals. Then for the encapsulation efficiency, we employ UV visible to know how much of the phytochemicals were encapsulated or loaded into our system, and we have high encapsulation efficiencies. For quercetin, we had almost 80%, and for resveratrol, 71.4%. And this could be due to the methodology we chose, as we made this great concentration gradient that drove the phytochemicals into the pores. And also because the interactions they are having are strong, hydrogen interactions, or the pi-pi stacking are making the phytochemicals get into the pores, and they are confined in the pores. And also we can say that the quercetin encapsulation could be a little higher than the resveratrol because of these hydroxyl groups. Quercetin has 5 in comparison to resveratrol that only has 3. And similar drug encapsulation efficiencies have been reported. Well, this drug encapsulation confirms that we chose an appropriate methodology to encapsulate them. And we have strong interactions of the silica and the polyphenols. Now for the determination of the cumulative drug release, we perform this to simulate the physiological conditions in which the system will be releasing the phytochemicals. That was done in PBS, physiological pH of 7.4 for 75 hours. And up in here we can see the free phytochemicals, and they have a burst release. And this is not desirable because in the body, if you have a burst release, that will be cleared very fast. So we expect to have a sustained and controlled release that can be accumulating in the body, so we can see the effects of the phytochemicals. And free quercetin and resveratrol almost achieved a complete release. They were like in the 70% of cumulative release after 75 hours. But in the case of our formulation, we had a mid-release at the beginning, like before the first 10 hours, but then we can see a sustained release in the 75 hours. And we had a maximum release of quercetin around 30% of cumulative release and 20% of resveratrol. This is not very high, and probably we will need to modify our surface to have a bigger release, but we do have a sustained release in all that 75 hours. And now for the evaluation of the antioxidant capacity, we perform 3 different assays to have a more comprehensive and robust understanding of our system's antioxidant potential. And in here, in the 3 assays, silica has a negligible capacity, and that was expected as it is chemically inert. And the most potent compound was the quercetin in the 3 assays. Resveratrol also exerted considerable antioxidant capacity, but I'm going to focus on the capacity of our system, as it could surpass the antioxidant capacity of resveratrol, of free resveratrol. So we can assume that we have somehow an enhanced capacity when compared to free resveratrol. But we do not have that same enhanced capacity compared to quercetin. But this could be due because the assay only lasts 30 minutes, and as you saw, our release lasts hours. So that effect might be due to the surface phytochemicals, and they are interacting very few times. So in a more complex assay, we could evaluate the timing and the interaction within the time. For the anti-inflammatory capacity, we did this with turbidimetric assay, and we measured the inhibition of protein denaturation when we introduce heat. And we use diclofenac, that is an anti-inflammatory drug, as a control of inhibition. And surprisingly, quercetin surpassed diclofenac inhibition, during almost 99% of inhibition. Diclofenac was like 98, 99. And surprisingly, as well, silica exerted more inhibition of inflammation than resveratrol, and this could be because since we have cytosol groups in the surface, they can interact with the proteins. So we do not think that this is an intrinsic capacity of silica, it's just that the physicochemical properties of the cytosol groups could stabilize the proteins. And our system had a dose-dependent inhibition, and it went up to 75% of inhibition, surpassing silica, resveratrol, and almost reaching diclofenac and quercetin. So we can say that the silica carrier, when loaded with the polyphenols, provide a strong anti-inflammatory capacity in vitro. And for the conclusions, we successfully synthesized our mesoporous silica nanoparticles. They were uniform, spherical, monodispersed, with a size range that is appropriate for biological properties. It was highly stable. It has textural properties that allows for a high drug loading and for a control and sustained release. Also, the encapsulation had a high drug encapsulation efficiency for both polyphenols, and we have strong interactions of our host and our drugs or the phytochemicals. We have a partial amorphization of our phytochemicals and an enhanced thermal stability. We have sustained and controlled release. And for the biological performance, we have a strong multi-assay capacity and an enhancement when compared to free resveratrol. And for the anti-inflammatory capacity, we have up to 75% of inhibition that also approaches diclofenac and quercetin and surpasses resveratrol and the silica nanoparticles. Overall, all the objectives were accomplished. All the synthesis, loading, and characterization objectives were accomplished. And the mesoporous silica nanoparticles are a promising platform to stabilize and co-encapsulate different polyphenols to evaluate their synergistic effects in non-communicable diseases or in diseases characterized by oxidative stress and inflammation. And future optimization of our system is required before employing it in real life. For future perspectives, well, first, I think the most important thing would be to optimize the surface chemistry of our nanoparticles. That would be adding the stimuli responsive mechanisms, and they can respond to pH or to temperature or external factors like ultrasound. We also can improve the colloidal stability by adding pegylated groups or amine groups. We could have targeted ligands like folic acid to make a targeted delivery into tumors. We could also explore the enhancement of the loading and an enhancement of the architecture and stability of our system. We could try to optimize the ratios of quercetin and resveratrol to see if more quercetin or more resveratrol exert different properties. And I think it's important also to try to synthesize and measure silicon nanoparticles by using surfactants or templates that give us ordered mesoporous structures. And it's also important to conduct long-term physicochemical stability of the system. Also for the in vitro biological evaluation, well, here it is important to mention that we did perform some evaluations on cells, but the concentrations explored were not enough to exert an effect, and it was kind of unfair to the system showing those results because they were also done only the first 24 hours, and as I mentioned, we have a sustained release up to 75 hours, so we thought it was we needed to control those experimental conditions before showing those results. So future perspectives to extend the exposure time of the system to 48 or 72 hours. Also make more assays, not only MTT or cytotoxic assays, also apoptosis assays, mitochondrial dysfunction, cell cycle modulation, or qPCR to measure specific activity of targets, and also testing other cell lines. We used an ovarian cancer cell line, but it was highly resistant, so we could explore other cancer cell lines that are not that resistant, or other types of cancer and healthy cells. It's important to know if our system is killing healthy cells, because in that case we would need to modify it. And also perform advanced release studies under pathological conditions. The cumulative release experiment was done on physiological pH, but it's also important to evaluate acidic pH or conditions that are similar to diseases. And the in vitro validation, we would need to perform pharmacokinetic toxicity and other biodistribution studies, and also test in other in vivo models related to inflammatory diseases or to neurodegenerative, metabolic, and tumor models. Now I want to acknowledge CECITI or CONACYT and Tecnológico de Monterrey for the grant and the funding during this time. Also, I want to thank UNAM for the research internship, the obligated research internship, and my advisor and committee members. Thank you for all your support and guidance. And now I want to switch to Spanish to thank all these people. Doctora, gracias por recibirme en el laboratorio de biomateriales, en el CEFATA. No están aquí presentes, pero fueron de mucha ayuda. Gus, Beto, Emilio, Maru, Emilia, Daniel, Fer, Sandra, Melanie, Zaret, Viri y Mani. Hicieron muy llevadero la estancia. Aprendí mucho de todos y le agradezco mucho el tiempo, el espacio, los materiales. Creo que sin su ayuda no hubiera sido posible, entonces le agradezco mucho. A mi mamá de la ciencia, muchas gracias, doctora, por todo su apoyo desde la carrera. Creo que usted inundó mi corazón con este sentido de hacer ciencia con mucho amor y con mucha ética. Entonces, muchas gracias por seguirme hasta estos puntos de la vida. Una mención especial a Andrea Canseco y Alex Aguilar, porque fue un relajo que todos estuviéramos aquí. Lo estuve trabajando a deshoras, me avisaron como a las 8 o 9 de la noche que esto iba a ser posible, entonces les agradezco mucho. A mis papás por todo su apoyo, por todo este tiempo que me han ayudado, guiado, amado. A mis hermanos, que no sé si se conectó Fercho, pero ahí estaban, que han sido también una parte fundamental en este viaje. A mis abuelos, que están ahí atrás, gracias por su apoyo, por confiar, por creer en mí. A mi novio que se salió, a mis primas, ahí está Katy, Jimena no pudo estar aquí, pero les agradezco mucho porque ustedes fueron un paño de lágrimas en estos 2 años y medio y en toda la vida. A mis tíos Vero y Miguel también que están por aquí, y a mis amigas que han hecho mucho más llevadero la estancia en el posgrado, que ustedes saben que no ha sido fácil. Yoli, no estás en el posgrado, pero tampoco fue fácil aguantar mis 2 años en el posgrado. Y a mis amigas del posgrado que saben lo que es estar aquí y que la sufrimos juntas y que nos mandábamos reels para animarnos. Muchas gracias. Y también quiero hacer una mención especial que va en dedicatoria a mis abuelitos. Mis 1000 referencias. That's all.
Well, thank you very much, Andrea, for your nice presentation. So let's start a short, not short, maybe it will be a long question and answer session. So comenzamos una sesión de preguntas, audiencia. So first, profesora Andrea.
Gracias. Creo que me escuchan todos, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Pues mira, primero felicitarte, me encantó tu presentación, pausada, tranquila. Nos explicaste a detalle muchas cosas. Luego, así como tú agradeciste estar en el laboratorio de biomateriales, te quiero agradecer porque te esforzaste muchísimo en aprender toda la parte de materiales, todas las técnicas que para ti eran muchas nuevas y que te tocó sufrir y aprender. Felicidades, lo hiciste bien, lo hiciste muy bien. Entonces, yo más que preguntas de tu algunas recomendaciones o algunas dudas que tengo con todo el trabajo que has hecho, que es mucho. Pones dentro de las perspectivas o las cosas a mejorar, que verías la relación adecuada entre resveratrol y quercetina. ¿Cuál sería para ti o por dónde empezarías, tomando eso mismo en cuenta con toda la experiencia que ya tienes de todos los experimentos? ¿Cuál sería la concentración con la que tú empezarías a hacer tus pruebas ya, por ejemplo, en pruebas antitumorales?
¿Ya desde el sistema?
Sí, del sistema.
Yo creo que el mayor problema que tuvimos fue que las evaluaciones ya en las células se hicieron en unas concentraciones muy limitadas. Nuestra mayor concentración no era ni siquiera la mitad de la concentración más baja de las pruebas antiinflamatorias. Entonces creo que me basaría en las concentraciones de las pruebas inflamatorias. Tal vez una para arriba, una para abajo, para ver si el sistema necesita más o necesita menos, pero creo que partiría de 500 microgramos por mililitro, que es el mínimo que yo empleé en las antiinflamatorias. Y si no, creo que lo primero que evaluaría sería ese rango de concentraciones para ver el efecto y a partir de eso. Pero creo que sí tendríamos que partir mínimo de 500 microgramos sobre mililitro, pues justo lo que decíamos, que no era justo para nuestro sistema decir, no tiene ninguna propiedad anticancerígena, pero estábamos en rangos de concentraciones muy diferentes. Entonces creo que para hacerle justicia y realmente saber, necesitaríamos modificar ese rango de concentraciones y también lo de los tiempos, porque para mí 24 horas no eran suficientes. Entonces creo que eso sería lo que implementaría, un rango de concentraciones más alto y evaluarlo mínimo 48 horas o 72 horas para ver si esta entrega controlada y sostenida tenemos nos llega a tener un efecto en ese tiempo y en esas concentraciones.
Y por ejemplo, a esas concentraciones que estoy viendo yo ahí, ya de 3000, muy altas, ¿te sabes la concentración máxima permitida de nanopartículas de óxido de silicio que pueden tener los organismos?
Leí que han hecho evaluaciones hasta 200 microgramos por mililitro de la sílica sola. Creo que sería conveniente evaluar cómo funciona junta y justo lo que mencionaba, cómo se va distribuyendo en el cuerpo, porque como tal, la conversión de la sílica o la excreción de la sílica es segura, se convierte a ortosilícico ácido ortosilícico, supongo que es la traducción. Y ese es desechable, o sea, de hecho ya lo tenemos en el cuerpo, es muy seguro, pero creo que sí convendría evaluar hasta esas concentraciones en células sanas también, para saber si el efecto es la sílica, si el efecto son los fitoquímicos y qué le está haciendo a células sanas también.
Sí, justo eso te iba a mencionar, porque sí puedes trabajar en concentraciones muy altas, pero qué tanto estamos perjudicando esas concentraciones con las. Entonces, qué bueno que lo mencionas. Efectivamente, ahorita, bueno, algunos no lo saben, pero Andrea está trabajando también, están los resultados de la sílica sola, del resveratrol y todo, para ver hasta dónde podemos trabajar, porque es un vigilante que tenemos, Andrea, de poder saber hasta dónde. En caso de que todo nos salga bien en el futuro, yo sé que falta mucho todavía por hacer, faltan varias pruebas. ¿Cómo administrarías esto? ¿Cómo crees que será lo adecuado? Hablaste de sistemas de administración de fármacos. En este caso no son fármacos, son fitoquímicos, son metabolitos secundarios, pero ¿cómo los administrarías tú? ¿Cómo sugieres?
Yo creo que inyectado. Nos da varias ventajas, inyectado sobre consumirlo, ya que consumido tendríamos que hacer una formulación también aparte, ver cómo va interactuando en todo lo del ADME, cuando se ingiere, hay procesos enzimáticos, cuando va pasando, estómago, intestinos, todo eso son procesos que van afectando qué tanto se va absorbiendo. Entonces creo que lo más sencillo sería inyectado. Leí de aplicaciones inyectadas directo en tumor o también inyección como general, y creo que si fuera una inyección general definitivamente se tendría que estabilizar el sistema. Lo que nos ayuda mucho ahí son los polietilenglicol, todos los traigo en inglés, perdón, porque estabilizan mucho justo en la circulación sistémica. Entonces eso nos podría ayudar a prolongar la circulación sistémica en caso de que sea inyectado. Pero pues inyectado nos saltamos muchas barreras biológicas.
Justamente hablando ahí, el hecho de que se libere tan lento, porque su sistema libera lento, ¿crees que esto sea bueno o malo si lo ponemos inyectado?
Creo que nos podría jugar en ambas partes, porque si se tarda mucho y no logramos esquivar todas las barreras inmunológicas, pues no se va a entregar nada y se va a desechar. Pero si logra evadir ciertas barreras biológicas, si logra evadir las barreras inmunes, ¿no? Los macrófagos, por ejemplo, que son los detectores que van pues, desechando. Si logramos evadir esas barreras biológicas, creo que una entrega tan prolongada nos podría ayudar a tener tal vez alguna acumulación en los sitios específicos donde se desea tener la entrega del fitoquímico. Pero también se necesitaría hacer una entrega específica para ellos.
La última, Andrea. Hablaste o pusiste ahí referencias en donde indicabas otros sistemas donde ocupaban resveratrol con algo más, con quercetina con algo más, y veíamos y comparábamos tiempos de liberación. Hay otro trabajo similar que yo ya he publicado donde incluyen resveratrol, quercetina con esto, y de ser así, entonces me podrías decir cuál fue tu principal aportación.
No encontré uno de resveratrol y quercetina en nanopartículas mesoporosas de sílica. Hasta donde sé, este es el primer trabajo que se hace en este tipo de sistema. Sí hay uno, y de hecho fue el que hizo Adriana, que fue de curcumina y resveratrol, y creo que pues estamos empezando a ver que se le puede sacar mucho provecho a estos fitoquímicos. Es similar, pero tienen targets diferentes. Creo que estamos explorando otros dos fitoquímicos con dos posibilidades diferentes. En el caso de la curcumina me parece que es mucho más similar al resveratrol. En mi caso, las estructuras del resveratrol y la quercetina son más diferentes, y estamos viendo que la quercetina es la que nos está confiriendo más propiedades biológicas. Entonces creo que también nos ayudaría a ir descartando, ¿no? Si esta puede ser una nueva jugada a tratar o de coadyuvantes para enfermedades caracterizadas por estrés oxidativo y por inflamación, creo que podríamos ir viendo que fitoquímicos nos están dando más ventajas. En este caso, si me tuvieras que decir, ok, vas a hacer ahora otro sistema con otros fitoquímicos, ¿cuál de estos dos son más? Quercetina, y la evalúo con algo más, porque para mí fue más valioso el aporte de la quercetina en este sistema. Entonces creo que dentro de los malos resultados vamos sacando también conclusiones para todo lo que se podría ir haciendo después.
Muchas gracias, es para que todos tengan tiempo de preguntas.
Gracias. Muchas gracias, doctora Miriam. Doctora Rodríguez, por favor.
Hola, Diego. Antes que nada, felicitarte. Te he dicho que esta no es mi área de expertise, pero tu explicación fue muy clara. Se nota tu evolución a lo largo de los años desde que estabas en carrera desde aquí. Me siento muy honrada por el título de mamá científica, creo que es un besote horroroso así en el cerebro, ¿no? Es difícil, entonces te voy a preguntar y luego ya nos decimos cosas. Sale. Mira, mis preguntas efectivamente son, hay algunas que sí tienen que ver con tu metodología, pero por ejemplo, conceptos básicos. ¿Por qué, por ejemplo, el efecto inflamatorio de los grupos OH?
Porque pueden interactuar, o sea, los grupos succinol de la sílica pueden interactuar con proteínas, e incluso eso se ve en modelo, o sea, ya que se inyectan en el cuerpo, uno de los problemas es que interactúan demasiado rápido con las proteínas, y eso hace que se liberen o que se desechen muy rápido. Entonces por eso asumimos que pasó algo similar. Al tener tantos grupos hilanol disponibles, estos se unieron a las proteínas, establecieron ahí interacciones con las proteínas y las estabilizaron. No es que la sílica tenga actividad o capacidad antiinflamatoria, fue más por la estructura que tenemos ahí disponible para poder interactuar con la proteína.
Justo, ¿no? Y luego viene la pregunta de la proteína, que es a qué concentraciones podrías hacer para ayudar, o sea, saber confirmar lo que acabas de proponer, ¿no? Las nanopartículas en sílica son fáciles de agregarse, ¿no? O sea, son de los problemas que tienen de agregación. ¿Por qué crees que tu técnica fue eficiente, que me dices que justamente en la parte de agregación pues fue poca, y que además de esa agregación pues el tamaño del poro fue el adecuado? ¿Cuál crees que fue así la clave para hacerlo? Hiciste muchísimos ensayos y...
Hicimos muchísimos ensayos, hice 4 síntesis, pero justo partimos de una tesis que ya se había hecho en el grupo de investigación de la doctora, donde se habían evaluado los rangos en los cuales ponían teos, ponían el agua, etanol, o sea, ya se jugaban con esos rangos. Entonces mostraba una tabla, tanto de agua como tanto de etanol, nos da partículas en estos rangos, nos da partículas en estos rangos. Entonces nosotros nos fuimos directo a las recomendaciones que ya se tenían, que ya se sabía que daban en el rango que nos sirve pues para aplicaciones biológicas. Entonces tomamos ese rango, y lo que hicimos también en la metodología fue usar sonicación para evitar que las partículas se empezaran a aglomerar desde el momento en el que ya se estaban sintetizando. Otra de las ventajas de esta síntesis es que hay muchos factores que afectan en la síntesis, pero la medida en la que agregas los reactivos también afecta. Entonces fue una síntesis en la que yo agregaba literal una gota cada 15 segundos. Entonces eso también nos va ayudando a regular qué tan rápido van interactuando los compuestos en el sistema y qué tan rápido se forman las nanopartículas o qué tanta aglomeración podemos tener. Entonces creo que fue una ventaja que ya se había hecho y nosotros tomamos lo que ya sabíamos que servía para hacer la síntesis.
Sí, como que siento que ahí te faltó agregarle crema a tus factos, ¿me explico? O sea, es un trabajar. Entonces, incluso podrías haber hecho hasta un análisis estadístico en relación a comparación de medias y eso incluso hacer un mini review o una mini publicación, porque justamente dentro de los principales problemas que está en la síntesis de nanopartículas es la agregación. Entonces, eso creo que estaría increíble, bueno, ojalá que pues, no, ya lo tienes súper así amarrado, ¿no? Pero se puede incluso sacar por ahí algo, incluso en algún abuelito o cosas así. Entonces, te digo como que lo mencionaste muy rápido, pero sí es un trabajo bastante pesado, como tú dices, es una artesanía, ¿no? Hacer un poco las nanopartículas. Bueno, me dijiste que, por ejemplo, en tus espectros de infrarrojo con transformada de Fourier, sé que no me puedes al final decir cuál es la estructura como tal, porque es un pedacito. Tú comentabas otro tipo de técnicas. Por ejemplo, ¿qué técnicas utilizarías para complementar esta información?
Raman se usa mucho para complementar la información que da FTIR y también resonancia magnética nuclear.
Sí.
También nos sirve para saber las interacciones más a profundidad.
Claro, sí, por supuesto, para análisis bidimensionales. Ahora bien, tú hablas de la modificación del pH para justamente la regulación. ¿A qué H te irías? ¿Hacia el ácido o hacia el básico?
Ácido. Porque el microambiente tumoral está caracterizado por tener pHs ácidos. Entonces, normalmente se hace la evaluación en pH ácido y en pH fisiológico. Por falta de tiempo y recursos no se pudo hacer, pero sí es definitivamente algo muy necesario evaluar en un pH ácido.
¿Y por qué un pH ácido? O sea, ¿por qué el microambiente tumoral es ácido?
Es así cerrado.
Te voy a ayudar porque ya lo has hecho y lo hiciste conmigo. ¿Por qué tu medio con rojo de fenol se hace amarillo? Porque es ácido. ¿Por qué? ¿Qué indica un pH ácido?
Hay disrupciones en las células, no funcionan como las células normales.
Ajá, y además, ¿qué sucede con las células tumorales? Que
empiezan a crecer.
Y si crecen, entonces empiezan a generar metabolitos al medio que acidifican. Entonces, justo, o sea, lo sabes, te explico, lo hiciste 40 minutos en ese laboratorio, no vas antes de la universidad. ¿No? Órale, pues. Oye, los ligandos, bueno, porque desde tus perspectivas, bueno, podríamos hacer las modificaciones en la parte de la organización de las nanopartículas y hablas acerca de los ligandos. Los ligandos en tu forma, ya hablando de un ligando, ¿cómo funcionaría? O sea, ¿me dijiste que puede entrar a la célula o no entendí bien? ¿Podrías ampliar un poquito eso?
Se usan como si fueran capas o escudos. Entonces tienes tu nanopartícula con lo que le cargaste, entonces la tienes protegida. Y esos ligandos puede ser, por ejemplo, el ácido fólico para una entrega específica en células de cáncer, o pueden ser los polietilenglicoles, que ayudan también como escudo, las van guiando, van haciendo que puedan evadir estas barreras biológicas y que sean más estables. Entonces, muchos se usan como decoraciones, como si maquillaras el alrededor de tus nanopartículas.
Sí, además la característica es que como son cosas que la célula tiene que aceptar, o sea, tiene que recibir, eso facilita también la entrega del medicamento. Entonces, el uso de ligandos en la farmacéutica es súper común, entonces, efectivamente son como de las opciones en caso de que dijeras, bueno, no la podemos indicar directamente al tumor, pero queremos que vea que a través de la inyección era como tus opciones que colocabas, pues de esas opciones, ¿no? Oye, me hablaste de las células cancerígenas de Pero haz de cuenta que tienes un laboratorio increíblemente maravilloso, así lleno de todas las líneas celulares que quieras, de sanas, enfermas, así. ¿Cuál sería tu célula a escoger? ¿Y por qué?
Yo creo que ahí sí sería, a mí por interés personal, irme a células no tan investigadas. Hay tipos de cánceres que están sumamente investigados y creo que hay que hacer un poco por lo que no está investigado, ¿no? Porque al final está ahí y sí existe, ¿no? Entonces creo que abordar lo que no hay, lo que no se tiene, estaría muy interesante. La verdad, ahorita desconozco mucho de las de estadísticas del cáncer y todo, pero creo que valdría la pena irnos por algo que no esté tan investigado.
Y ya mi última pregunta tiene que ver más con tu percepción. ¿Cuál fue tu mayor aprendizaje durante estos 2 años y medio?
Híjole, creo que más que teórico o más que experimental o más que fue carácter, fue tolerancia a la frustración, fue que el experimento no te saliera 5 veces y pues a ver qué más, qué hicimos, qué podemos repetir, qué podemos quitar, qué podemos cambiar. Fue adaptarme a las circunstancias. Yo empecé mi proyecto de cero en enero, entonces contrarreloj, aceptar cosas que no puedo controlar. En el laboratorio pasa 1000 veces que se fue la luz, que se cayó el reactivo, que alguien agarró tu experimento, pasan muchas cosas que están fuera de tu control, entonces aprender a lidiar con eso y a soltar lo que no está dentro de tu control. Creo que al inicio el proyecto tenía una perspectiva, queríamos hacer 1001 cosas, se acabaron los reactivos, se acabó el tiempo, no estaba disponible tal, entonces es ir acomodándote y acoplándote a las circunstancias que tienes y tratando de sacar lo mejor que puedes con la mayor cantidad de información, con lo poco o mucho que tengas disponible en esos momentos.
Sí, te agradezco tu proyecto grita resiliencia, pero adaptabilidad al mismo tiempo. Y lo mágico es que abriste nuevas líneas, es decir, tu proyecto no se queda aquí y se acabó. Supongo que después en el laboratorio de la doctora Andrea me puso a construir y contar, ¿no? Hay una nueva, o sea, abriste caminos diferentes, ¿sí me explico? O sea, tu tesis, la ventaja de tu tesis y el trabajo que hiciste hace que se puedan hacer tus proyectos. Y eso es lo que es la investigación, es saber que sigues y sigues y sigues, y lo que te mantiene es justamente el carácter de la resiliencia. Entonces, te felicito mucho por cumplir y la calidad con la que lo hiciste. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, doctor Dorothy. Doctor González.
Thank you for your inclusive presentation. Okay? You explained everything in so much details. I have a few questions.
Thank you.
Okay? So, have you read about phytochemicals? They have different effects on the healthy cells and on the cancer cells. Why is it so?
They have these dual properties, and this dual behavior can be seen at different concentrations. One of our problems was that we evaluated low concentrations, and it has been reported that phytochemicals at low concentrations exert antioxidant capacities. But at high concentrations, they can exert pro-oxidant capacities even in healthy cells. And this is like a paradox. Also, they have these like magnificent properties, but the consumption of them, or when they are trying to translate the properties into clinical applications, they don't see the effects they see in vitro or in animal models. So they have a paradoxic behavior.
So, in healthy cells and cancer cells, when you inject, your formulation, so, or even the phytochemicals, if we are injecting, which cells are going to imbibe or accumulate more cancer cells or the healthy cells?
I think that would depend on the system, because if you make a targeted delivery, that would be specific, or you try to make it specific for cancer cells, and you also design your system to avoid the damage into healthy cells. But I think that depends on the design of your system.
Okay, so have you listened about the NPR effect?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened in that?
That is like a passive method by which nanoparticles accumulate into tumors, and they don't need like a lot of modification, and they just accumulate into tumor cells.
Okay, so the next question. You have done the characterization, yes, using DLS. Also, somebody else has done that. But do you know how the sample preparation is done for sample DLS? You have done by yourself. So, what are the important points that you have to consider when you are measuring your silica or the nanoformulation in DLS?
Well, you need to disperse it. You need it in aqueous media. Well, I evaluated in water, but that depends on what you are evaluating, because you could evaluate on physiological media, you could evaluate in PBS or in RPMI or TMM, or you could evaluate in ethanol. That depends on the approach or the application you are giving to your nanoparticles. But I use water, and you need to disperse it, so you need to sonicate. In my case, I ultrasonicated to ensure that the particles were separately enough. Otherwise, it could tend to agglomerate within each other.
Okay. And what is the sample preparation for PET analysis? How they prepare the sample?
They degasify the sample. They remove all the water content,
What is the gas content?
gas content, and they use nitrogen. And also the sample is frozen with the nitrogen.
So, in your case, when you showed the DLS of the silica and then you have prepared your nanoformulation, we have seen a very drastic change in the size. That it is like in silica it was approximately like 200 to 300 nanometers. And when you put the nanoformulation discussed in resveratrol, that time we see that it is from 1000 to 9000. Okay, this is a very high range. Okay, so what you can do to prevent the colloidal stability? What you can do to prevent the aggregation of the nanoparticle, or how you can improve the colloidal stability?
I think we could increase the sonication to see if it's like momentaneously aggregated, but also in the final formulation, we could add the functionalization either with amine groups or with the polyethylene polymers. That will increase the colloidal stability and also prevent from aggregation.
So when you put the nanoformulation into the system, human body, okay. So how these nanoformulations can be prevented from immune attack?
With the pegylation, it's like one of the most common approaches in which they evade this immune system.
In your system, you told that you can load hydrophilic compounds. Okay. So can we load hydrophilic also? Hydrophobic also?
Yeah, we can load both into the
you can attach particles or compounds with slow evaporation, like I did, but you can also functionalize your nanoparticles to have other groups available to interact with different types of molecules.
So in your drug release, how was the pattern? Like when you started, which compound is released in a faster pace and which was in slower pace?
Quercetin was released in a faster pace, and the release was much more higher than resveratrol. Well, for the encapsulated one. For free resveratrol and quercetin, I think the standard deviations are really high. And what I could see is that in the dialysis bags, the quercetin seemed to be accumulating into the dialysis bag, and I thought it was not releasing, but it seems that resveratrol was the one that wasn't releasing as much.
Okay. So have you found out the size of the quercetin and resveratrol?
Yeah.
And what is the charge over them?
I think they are both neutral.
Neutral?
Yeah, I think so.
For DGA analysis, what is the minimum amount of sample required to do that?
5 milli, but from 4 to 10 milligrams is the required.
Okay. And in Stewart method, it is normal version. I have not read about that, but in Stewart method, you can prepare micro and macroporous also, or is it only for the mesoporous materials?
I think that in my specific methodology, it's not that common to use this methodology to yield mesoporous structures, but the concentrations and ratios we use help in the mesoporous structure. But in common mesoporous silicon nanoparticle synthesis based on the Stewart method, they use a template or a surfactant like CTAC, and they almost all the reports I read were for mesoporous structures.
So, you know any other template that any other template used for preparation of mesoporous structure? Do you have any idea?
I read them, but the one that stuck with me was CTAC. I can remember another name.
So, in your anti-inflammatory graph that you showed, there you show that the silica is having very good anti-inflammatory effect, no? More or less like quercetin. So, in your PGA also, you should show us that these phytochemicals are more preserved when they are inside the nanoformulation or the silica. So in this case, you think that it is providing some sort of stability or thermal stability for the protein to be not getting degraded? Do you think there could be a possibility of that?
I think it's more the interaction of the surface of the silica with the protein, because I think it's very few time to get the proteins inside the pores and exert the thermal stability. But I don't know if that could be measured within time to see if the proteins could be thermally protected.
Yeah, because proteins are generally no, your pore size and pore volume are good enough to even encapsulate proteins. Maybe it could be a possibility here. Okay, thank you so much for all your answers.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Palma. Audiencias, alumnos, si tienen preguntas, adelante. ¿No? Okay. Entonces, thank you very much again, Andrea, for this nice presentation, as all the complimenters mentioned about that, and I completely agree with them. It's very clear, it's detailed, and you have presented it very, very well. I have a few questions. First and the foremost question is, what is the novelty of your work?
As I mentioned, I haven't read a system of mesoporosilicon nanoparticles collided with these two phytochemicals, so that's one of the biggest novelties. We also structurally characterize them and have some insights from these characterizations. We could say that this synthesis, it's good, but we could perform a better synthesis. So that type of insights also give novelty into this approach, because what worked for me was to have a base from the laboratory of Dr. Miriam. So this would serve as the base for future work. And they should say, okay, this synthesis may not be the best, so we can try another synthesis. Or we could employ this DPPH approach or something like that. They can have insights from this project. And we also use these phytochemicals together to see if they have the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory capacity, and to continue this line of investigation of non-communicable diseases and oxidative stress and inflammation.
So have you modified the synthesis procedure? Have you
No,
modified?
I haven't.
Is it exactly same as previously mentioned by the author?
No. What I'm saying is that in the future, other people that are interested in this line of investigation would see my methodology and get insights from it and say, oh, this works or this doesn't work, as per my knowledge. It's the first system of co-encapsulated resveratrol and quercetin into mesoporosilicon nanoparticles. Other people can take insight for future work, what can be done and what should be avoided.
Okay. Regarding the nanoparticle synthesis, have you modified the protocol from the previous one, or it's exactly the same?
We modified the time of reaction, because once you see the media turns whitish, it means that you have your nanoparticles. And in the first synthesis, I think I left the reaction for 5 hours or something like that. And in the one that I used for the co-encapsulation, we only required 3 hours, I think. So we changed that type of things. And these were the ones that with the better colloidal stability in DLS and zero potential. And also the same images were giving us spherical nanoparticles with the porous structure.
So you have used the same reagents as previously reported, right? You have not changed anything.
Yeah, the only thing I didn't use was a surfactant or template, as other mesoporosilicon nanoparticles that are highly ordered or that have highly ordered pores.
Okay.
I use a conventional stover methodology.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What kind of challenges you faced during your experiments?
I think one of the most difficult was anti-inflammatory capacity. I had to repeat it like 4 times, and it was difficult because, as you can see, I have 5 samples with 5 concentrations, and I had to do triplicates. And at the very beginning, we had variations, so I had to repeat it several times to have a proper result. And antioxidant capacity was giving me nightmares as well, because once you do it, you need to do a calibration curve, and that calibration curve, you can only use it when you have all your reagents. But once one reagent is finished, you have to redo everything. And I was running out of samples, or I had more samples, or I ran out of dBPH and I had to repeat everything. So that was the kind of things that were like difficult. But at the end, we managed everything, and here it is.
Okay, thank you. And next obvious question: what are the limitations of your work?
Colloidal stability, I think, is one of the main limitations. Also, that we didn't evaluate the cumulative release in acidic pH. I think there are a lot of assessments that need to be done. Also, well, now we have the evaluation in healthy cells, I think, but now of what I presented, I think it's missing an evaluation on healthy cells and the anti-cancer profile that we have. I think that's limiting the potential of our complex.
Okay, thank you. What is the purpose of encapsulation of drugs?
To protect them and to have a better, more controlled release of them, so they can exert their properties in a better manner.
Okay. How does the size of nanoparticles affect the nanotechnological research, especially the clinical research? What do you think? The size of the nanoparticles?
I think it is very important because there are a lot of reports that say that nanoparticles of bigger sizes get detected by the immune system easily and can be cleared out rapidly. So they suggest to elaborate nanoparticles between 100 nanometers and 200 nanometers, because if you do nanoparticles of smaller sizes, they could be cleared out as well. And if you like stay in this range, you have a good accumulation in the tumor, for example, and also you can still like pass through this immune detection.
Thank you very much. That's all from my side. So thank you very much again. And now I would like to request our audience. And many congratulations. ¿Alguien tiene palabras?
Muy agradecido, quiero decirles que uno como padre trabaja toda su vida para un momento así. Entonces, muy contento, muy orgulloso de ti. Muchas gracias y bueno, es el fin de un ciclo y el inicio de otro que te lleva a cerrar y a madurar y a ser un adulto y una persona de bien para esta sociedad. Muchas gracias.
chicos a donde quieren llegar. Felicidades a todos. Felicidades, Mica. Gracias.
¿Alguien más?
Pues también doy gracias de que todo esto pues va quedando en la ciencia escrito y que va a servir mucho para futuro, para la humanidad. Muchas gracias y felicidades, hija. Sigue adelante.
Felicidades, excelente trabajo. Muchas gracias.
¿Alguien más?
Yo nada más. Ya dije muchas cosas. Primero que nada, te agradezco que te hayas venido al lado del mar. Yo sé que vas a regresar, tienes todo el material, tienes todo el hueso para hacerlo, la proactividad, la resiliencia, pero también el pedir ayuda, seguir adelante. Es un proceso, es difícil, o sea, es una deconstrucción para luego construirte más. Empiezas a cambiar tu método de pensamiento, ya no preguntas a alguien, sino ya tú empiezas a responder justamente eso. Te deseo todo el éxito del mundo, sabes que estoy aquí para lo que necesites. La verdad es que se necesitan más personas como tú en la ciencia, y justamente cuando le pones amor a las cosas cobran sentido, y creo que es lo que has estado construyendo. Entonces tu trabajo habla, pero más habla tu ser, de cómo eres, de cómo creciste y lo que espero que llegues a ser. Y pues nada, ya sabes lo que tienes que hacer.
Gracias.
Más.
Ay, perdón. Bueno, primero, muchísimas felicidades. Creo que todos aquí estamos muy orgullosos de ti, de todo el trabajo, pues, todo lo que representó esta maestría. No fue un camino fácil, pero lo lograste y no todas las personas lo hubieran hecho, así que felicidades. Bueno, tuve el privilegio de trabajar contigo. Y más que eso, tuve el privilegio de ser tu amiga y te has convertido como familia. La verdad, tienes muchas cualidades que te van a servir para tu futuro y vas a lograr grandes cosas. Entonces, felicidades.
Chile.
Pues llevamos mucho de conocernos, también estoy muy orgullosa de ti, al igual que todas las personas que estamos en este salón. Y también, como lo han comentado, también creo que ambas partes son muy importantes de tu crecimiento como profesionista, también como persona. Verte exponer hoy con esa seguridad, ese inglés, esa calma, esa pausa y sobre todo, sí, esa seguridad de yo estuve metida en el laboratorio, yo repetí estos experimentos, yo sé lo que me costó y yo aprendí todas estas técnicas, ¿no? Y lo reflejaste y muchísimas felicidades por ello. Y también de tu aprendizaje que comentaste de tu carácter, también lo vi, o sea, también te vi crecer, también te vi no darte por vencida, intentarlo una y otra vez y también bajar el ritmo, que es algo que sigo aprendiendo también de ti, que a veces que es necesario y pues como para ver un todo. A lo que te dediques, sé que vas a seguir brillando, seguir creciendo, como dice la doctora Goriti, porque le pones el corazón a las cosas. Y también, al igual que Andy, estoy encantada de ser tu amiga, de verte crecer en este espacio y enhorabuena, muchísimas felicidades.
¿Alguien más? Sí, dirigí.
Pues creo que más que una maestra, aquí se formó una guerrera. Tuviste absolutamente todos los obstáculos alrededor de ti. Y ¿sabes qué? Digo con orgullo el día de hoy que todo eso lo venciste, Andy. Incluso el día de ayer, que tuvimos todavía por ahí varias limitantes muy importantes y que creímos que esto no iba a suceder, mírate ahora.
lo has logrado todo y estoy muy orgullosa, de verdad infinitamente orgullosa de ti. Me da también muchísima felicidad de encontrar a gente como tú. Te recuerdo tanto hace un par de años, poquito más, a un par de Andis que llegaron al laboratorio queriendo buscar ácido sulfúrico y ácido nítrico concentrado, y ahí estaba yo envolviéndolas en guantes, en cubrebocas, en mascarillas, porque, o sea, yo decía, este proyecto está, gigante, y ustedes súper tranquilas, queriendo agarrar ácidos así como si nada, ¿no? Y hoy por hoy no me describes un ácido, Andy, describes nanopartículas, describes un chorro de técnicas que solamente tú comprendes al 100%. Te felicito muchísimo, Andy, de verdad, y te quiero al infinito y más allá. Un aplauso.
Creo que una de las cosas más bonitas que tenemos en la vida es el aprendizaje. Muchas veces lo tenemos a base de golpes y también a veces a base de experiencias muy bonitas. Y bueno, creo que aparte del aprendizaje propio, ver el aprendizaje en otra persona, en una persona que amamos, que estimamos y que queremos, es precioso. Entonces yo te quiero decir que he tenido el orgullo de acompañarte en este gran aprendizaje que has tenido. Creo que ver a la Andy de hace 2 años y medio es completamente diferente a ver a la Andy que estoy viendo ahorita. Entonces, pues es para mí un orgullo haberte acompañado en todo este proceso, que a veces fue complicado porque era verte atravesando por muchas dificultades, era verte a veces triste, a veces muy frustrada y pues experimentando toda la montaña rusa de emociones que puede experimentar un humano. Pero es un orgullo verte pues ahorita en estos puntos y ver todo ese aprendizaje que a pesar de que, como dije, algunas veces fue a golpes, no deja de ser un aprendizaje y no deja de ser un aprendizaje. Muchas felicidades. Te amo y te quiero acompañar en todo lo que sigas aprendiendo y en todo lo que sigas creciendo, aunque yo no entienda ni un quinto de ciencia.
Hola, soy tu fan. No, pues yo nada más felicitarte porque me tocó vivir contigo varias etapas y pues por experiencia sé que tú no lo ves, pero la gente que te quiere te ha visto crecer y te ha visto cambiar, y pues yo estoy muy feliz y muy orgulloso de ti porque te has hecho muy fuerte. Yo nada más lo que te diría es que no lo sueltes, o sea, que aprecies todo lo que has hecho y que has aprendido y lo lleves contigo en estas nuevas etapas, porque bien lo menciona tu papá, se acerca, es otro comienzo, es el final de una etapa, pero es el inicio de otra, y si te llevas lo que aprendiste, esto que formaste y esta versión de ti que has logrado hacer, pues te va a llevar muy lejos, ¿no? Y muy lejos en el sentido de lo que tú consideres que es un éxito de vida. Entonces, pues no lo sueltes y de aquí para adelante sabes que pues, tienes todo mi apoyo y pues, aquí voy a estar para ti porque si soy tu gran fan. Gracias, doctora.
Primero que nada, muchas felicidades. Sabes que siempre me he sentido muy orgullosa de ti. Sabes que siempre has sido mi ejemplo a seguir. Y aunque en años tú llevas más tiempo viéndome crecer, creo que estos últimos años he gozado y he disfrutado de todo el aprendizaje que nos has llegado a compartir. Así como dicen, aunque tal vez no entendamos mucho, pero es apasionante ver todo lo que haces, todo lo que has logrado, y creo que siempre tú nos has compartido el gusto, el amor que tienes a la ciencia, y a pesar de que este camino no fue fácil, que hubo muchas curvas, lo encontraste, y más que tú lo encontraras, creo que también la ciencia te encontró a ti, y es muy bueno y muy gratificante saber que hay personas como tú en este mundo contribuyendo a la ciencia.
Thank you very much and all the best for your future endeavors. Many, many successes. Okay, now
Mis mamás trajeron unos bocadillos para
어쩌다 보니 처음으로 마주하는 오늘이라서 사무치게 아픈 말 한마디에 내가 더 싫어도 신경 쓰지 말자. 우리 목소리로 어디서라도 부르자. 청춘 찬가. 벨소리가 울릴 때 겁이나 심장이 멈춰 놀라는 요즘 혼자 지내고 싶고 혼자 있기 싫고 나도 날 모르겠어. 도대체 나의 행복은 어딨나요? 그 누구도 대답해줄 수 없어. 꺼진 폰 화면 속에 비친 내 모습 보며 말할래. 오늘 집에 가는 길에 내게 수고했다고. 마냥 쉽지 않았지만 나쁘지 않았다고. 숨 막히는 세상 속에 작은 것 하나에 잠깐 웃었다고. 어쩌다 보니 처음으로 마주하는 오늘이라서 사무치게 아픈 말 한마디에 네가 더 싫어도 신경 쓰지 말자. 우리 목소리로 어디서라도 부르자. 청춘 찬가. 나의 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 날 감싸준 포근한 이불. 이 사소한 따뜻함에 또 내일을 기다리면서 잠들게. 내일 아침에 울리는 시끄러운 알람이 어제보다 조금만이라도 늦지 않기를. 숨 막히는 세상 속에 이 모든 게 날아서 참 좋을 거야. 어쩌다 보니 처음에도 마주하는 내일이라도 사무치게 아픈 말 한마디에 내가 더 싫어도 신경 쓰지 말자. 우리 목소리로 어디서라도 부르자. 청춘 찬가. 바보 끝까지가 알아 이룰 것도 어나지ように感じて生きていたらきっとこれほどまで愛せなかった。 Don't wanna let go let go let go あなたが教えてくれた色が彩るな life Let go let go let go 色あせない。あの名画のように何度も何度も遠く離れてもどうしようとっても一つの誓い Whenever 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 changing 染まり合うような補い合うような愛はきらめき I know that we'll never change you誓いは間違いじゃないんだ。どんなあなたでも知りたい。Don't wanna let go let go let go 名前がわからない感情と向き合うとき Let go let go let go そばにはいつもあなたがいた。